Good evening, everyone. I knew this was going to be a challenge when we were scheduled against a jail rock concert. But I'm glad that we have at least a balance between speakers and audience. That's something, and maybe we can skew that balance a little bit as we go along. But I think it's still worth having this chat. I mean, we're among friends anyway, and now we're literally among friends. That's good, because the topic is important, and the topic is hot. The topic is so difficult for us to address because it's constantly evolving, and so I'm super glad that we have three fantastic experts, if only for my benefit and your four benefits, to learn from. And this is, I think, particularly relevant because not only are we looking at different perspectives, but we're also going around the world in terms of how issues related to critical minerals are being addressed, how corruption issues related to critical minerals are addressed. But given the setup that we have, I suggest we engage in a conversation. We have some questions prepared, of course, but I'm keen to get your inputs and thoughts and engagements as well. So I'm not going to wait until the very end to give you the chance to formally ask questions. Just, speak up, raise your hand, give me a sense if you want to ask something. I know, Monica, you always have questions, so please feel free to do that so we can have a constructive conversations. And just one last thing I'll say is, I appreciate this because I find the sector fascinating, and I find the opportunity to speak with you three about this issue fascinating as we are all trying to figure out what to do, actually. So I had a bit of a note prepared about the different types of corruption risks related to critical minerals, but I'm not going to go through that because I think we'll have a conversation about this rather, and I think that will be much more insightful. And so I suggest we still go with the original order broadly because it goes from sort of more policy level to specific cases and country situations, which I think will be very nice. And I'm in particular keen to discuss the cases and the country situations more to see what we can draw out and learn from them, or at least that's what I will be doing. So, looking forward to it. But let's start with framing a little bit, and I'm really glad that Luca could make it because Luca, you've had a busy week or busy month, I should say. It's been a tremendously active time at the OECD, and of course, for those of you who don't know Luca, he is a policy analyst at the Center for Responsible Business Conduct at the OECD, which sounds quite neutral and doesn't fully represent the thought leadership that he represents in this space. For years, I've had the benefit of learning from Luca and his colleagues thinking about this space, and it's been distilled in quite a few public products, actually. And so I wonder if maybe you could share a little bit about your learning about the risks, but in particular the risks that businesses face as they enter this space.
Thanks, Juhani, and as always also for the kind words. So indeed, at the OECD Center, I work at the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct. You may actually be familiar with the OECD because of the Working Group on Bribery and the Anti-Bribery Convention. And if we could, great, put up the slides. This is the OECD in Paris. But the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct actually...
Sorry, 1 second. Ma'am, welcome. Please come sit in the front with us. We're having a tight group of friends here. Thank you for coming. Sorry, Luca, to interrupt.
Absolutely. No worries. The OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct actually works quite closely with businesses. It's even in the name. And we do so through this instrument that you see here on the slide, the OECD Due Diligence Guidance for Responsible Mineral Supply Chains. This is a non-mandatory instrument that allows industries, companies all along mineral supply chains to identify and mitigate adverse impacts all along their supply chains. I insist on the word supply chains because most due diligence standards actually stop at tier 1 suppliers, right? I mean, this is where most compliance efforts actually stop. It is applicable to all minerals, and it is applicable to a global scope. So we actually did quite some work on critical minerals. The guidance is applicable to companies. Companies actually are the ones who need to set up the management systems, use it to identify where they're buying the material from, what are the conditions of extraction and trade, and how to mitigate those adverse impacts they might be linked to through a business relationship. But civil society and governments actually can play a critical role in creating this enabling environment for companies to do their job, to carry out their due diligence. And this is what this whole of supply chain due diligence concept looks like. It means that those companies that are closer to the consumer need to understand where are their smelters and refineries located, and then checking that they are actually carrying out on the ground due diligence assessments on those high-risk supply chains in collaboration with local government and civil society organizations. Now, to go back to your original question, Juhani, I wanted to bring a few things we usually hear from companies, some arguments that companies tell us when it comes to corruption. And the first one that we hear, unfortunately, is it's just the cost of doing business, right? And here we can see how the short-term versus long-term impact of corruption actually plays out. We know that corruption in the mining sector is associated with unpredictable renegotiation of contracts. We've seen shakedowns, for example, of companies in mineral-producing countries when political elites changed. And so this is also linked to the lack of secure tenure and really an arbitrary enforcement of rules. So companies that allow, enable, tolerate these corrupt activities actually can undermine the rule of law more generally, but it actually comes back at them quite directly. And then we also see that there is a risk to companies when it comes to heightened risks of increased unrest and violence. When it comes to local communities, ensuring social license to operate is not often the priority when acquiring licenses under corrupt deals. And when it comes to artisanal and small-scale miners, I can quote a few examples, but one that is particularly telling from the DRC, one can look at from the on the cadastre, mining cadastre around the city of Kolwezi in southern DRC, and while the whole department, almost the whole Lualaba is checkered, completely covered by mining concessions that include entire villages, and so there are very few viable mining deposits that are left for artisanal small-scale mining. And there again, there is a potential for conflict. And then the last one, there's also risk when it comes to audits, social and environmental audits, when there is business-to-business corruption, trying to forge some of the results. Well, these may expose companies to adverse impacts in the supply chain, and these are actually impacts that companies may be liable for in the future. Another one that we hear, what did I do? Is it does not really concern us. This we hear it from downstream companies. This is a few excerpts from interviews we've done. We didn't identify any corruption risk in our supply chain. Most are environmental social risk. I found it very hard to believe. We requested additional information on how the company reacted to the lawsuit, e.g. staffing, oversight over compliance program, increase in headcount of compliance department, and training of staff. And then the third one is related. We would only take action if there were a conviction for bribery. So if there were suspicions of bribery, well, the supplier would not take action because they were waiting for the final judgment. And when there was judgment, I mean, we can see that everything is fine because they added a few compliance officers to their management system. So there again, this is not credible. We've done some research. Sorry, it's a little bit small, but what that graph says is that for each and every of the 40 minerals that we looked at, of the mineral supply chains, we have found allegations of financial crimes and corruption. This, of course, is concentrated in precious metal and stones, but there are really each and every supply chain that we looked at. And what's interesting also is that it's not only artisanal small-scale mining, but it's mostly large-scale mining. The last one that I wanted to highlight is supply chain said so and so, and then legal said no. We see how sometimes there are conflicting incentives between the legal department and the civil society, corporate social responsibility supply chain departments. One is looking at legal risks to the company. The other is looking at risks to the people and the planet. One is looking at, of course, focusing on KYC, what is actually legal liability of the company, at direct suppliers, and the others are looking way beyond that. These are the three, I think, major risks to companies that I wanted to highlight, and some of the unfortunately, real life arguments that we hear when we speak to them.
Thank you so much for setting up this conversation, and not only from a conceptual perspective, but actually from a very real perspective. Even quotes from company, which are quite astonishing, I have to say, and it reminds me of the fact that we talk about a very specific sector here. Very specific sector with very strong economic incentive, political incentives, geopolitical incentives, and if there was ever a sector where one would say the ends justify the means, this is probably what would be applied here, right? And so balancing these two, I don't know what to call it, moral imperatives, integrity versus climate change. It's a really, really particular challenge, and so these kind of quotes really remind me of the fact that, hey, everything goes basically, and so we have the fantastic opportunity to go from this already quite specific situation to now go to Zambia. And Ruben is an eminent anti-corruption expert. I was asking him how I should introduce him, and he said this title is no longer it. I'm just an anti-corruption person. Well, you're a very eminent anti-corruption expert, and I remember talking to you when I first started working in this space of environmental corruption, and I had a very lovely conversation with you, and you advised me on the importance of the political change and seizing windows of opportunities, and Zambia has certainly been trying to seize these windows of opportunity. I'm very keen to hear from you now how you assess the situation, how things are going in one of the countries at the very forefront of the critical minerals boom.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a tough question to ask. Where are we as Zambia? As you rightly indicated, there is this critical minerals boom, and Zambia, DRC, among others, are featuring very prominently in the discussions. To start with, I think we've seen a lot of geopolitics at play. We have already seen a number of memorandum of understanding signed between the U.S. government and Zambia and Democratic Republic of the Congo, primarily for cobalt and lithium and just the whole EV battery value chain. But the U.S. reaction and EU reaction is a little bit belated. This is in reaction to the fact that China has had a firm hold within Africa for the last number of years, and they would all want to have a share of the critical minerals. As we speak, Africa just had a conversation, a conference with South Korea, and Zambia has again entered into another MOU with South Korea to do with its critical mineral value chain. Therefore, we are talking of a country that is in my view, reacting to all this rush for critical minerals, and in doing so, without having the necessary anti-corruption safeguards put in place. We are yet to finalize the National Critical Minerals Strategy. I've looked at the draft, and again, without being quoted, it's a hopeless document, but it doesn't quite say what Zambia seeks to benefit from this, as opposed to just providing opportunities for all these big players coming on the scene. But notwithstanding the debate on critical minerals, I think we have to also bear in mind the fact that mining is capital intensive. And in as much as we would like local players to participate, we're still going to fall back on the big players, the big mining houses, the upstream companies that have the money to invest. And they use the investment opportunity as a leverage to get around a number of the requirements from a licensing perspective. So corruption risks are quite prevalent at the point of licensing, to the extent that with the new government that came into office in August 2021, they decided to close the entire mining cadastre on the pretext that there was a lot of corruption happening in the award of mining licenses. Secondly, government has indicated they are going to establish a Minerals Regulation Commission. The cadastre only opened 8 months later, with new allegations now of corruption of the new rulers essentially giving themselves licenses. So took away licenses from the former corrupt political elite to give themselves licenses. And it comes to a head where the former Minister of Foreign Affairs ended up being, well, he resigned purportedly, but the reason why he resigned is that a Chinese investor decided to expose the fact that he had been paid in excess of $250,000 for a mining license. And this is a mining license that was obtained after the cadastre was closed. So the point really is that, and I've argued that just merely dealing with legislative changes and institutional changes, as we are doing at the moment, will not resolve the problem of corruption in the mining sector and in the critical mining value chain. And the reason is that we are not dealing with a political settlement argument. The political elite working with the economic elite have been determining how minerals are mined and who has the mineral licenses or who does the transfer. I'm bringing out the issue of transfer of licensing because, as you may know, Zambia has one of the new players on the mining scene called cobalt metals, where Bill Gates has interest. They claim they're using AI technology to do the exploration. They got a license without really following the necessary procedure insofar as transfer of licenses is concerned. But there it is. Now they are floating the argument that they have made the largest discovery of copper deposit on the African continent. So the big mining houses use a leverage of investment to circumvent the requirements of a law. And unless we also address that, we address the power settlement argument, we'll never address corruption in the critical minerals value chain. But the rush environment is also breeding speculative behavior. And we have to bear in mind that the critical minerals have attracted new players who are unknown even to oversight institutions, government itself. We're not just dealing with the old group. We're now talking of new entities coming in with technology players, etc. So this recent explosion of interest on critical minerals has brought a lot of interest, but it has also brought a number of challenges. The perceived trade-offs worry us in Zambia greatly. The fact that we're talking of climate change, just energy transition, and the need for us to really play our part is allowing for less scrutiny of what's happening in critical minerals. And corruption, therefore, is not, we are not paying enough attention because we're saying climate change is the overriding factor and we need to address that. When it comes to issues of local content, again, we have a problem there because the local players may not be receiving a fair share of the mine supply contracts which will be available. Again, because we need to provide these critical minerals, which have been approved, by the way, through an MOU which government has committed itself to. So there are a lot of factors that we need to look at, even as we address the critical minerals sector. What's the role of civil society? Civil society has been playing a role to try and provide oversight on how accountable our licensing system is, how accountable we are with environmental, social impact assessments, etc. But speaking as an environmentalist, I keep saying looking at the environmental and social impact assessment is looking at the wrong thing. EIAs are speculative studies, and a lot of things go in there which are not tested. The focus should be on the environmental audits, which are supposed to be done after a couple of years after the mine has been running. That is where we're going to see the mischief, whether the mine houses are really mitigating all the environmental and social impacts that they talk about. So there's a lot that we need to look at if we are going to look at corruption in the sector. But lastly, I think that we cannot look at corruption in critical minerals without looking at the overall corruption landscape. And the reason why I say this is because, again, in a country like Zambia with very weak political party financing regulations, almost non-existent, the ruling party finds it very easy to award investment contracts and even to award tax holidays to mining houses who in turn do provide a substantial amount of funding for political party activities, and off-the-book funding for that matter. So if we again don't have very good access to information laws, as the case is with Zambia, we've just passed access to information with very little institutional capacity to implement the access to information. If we have weak beneficial ownership transparency, all these will then conspire to make it very difficult to address corruption in the critical minerals value chain. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much. And I guess when we talked back then, we were talking about seizing the window of opportunity. That's not quite what we had in mind. Is seizing the old mining licenses and give them to the new guys. Two quick things that aren't entirely related, but I should have said before. First of all, thank you so much for the IACC. For all of us, this has been a long week. For you, it's been a much longer week, a 2-year lasting week. So we really appreciate you being with us here during the graveyard shift. And also, happy belated birthday. Yes, big party that came together for you. So many things to unpack, and I'm going. Well, if nobody else asks questions, I will certainly ask some of questions in the next round. But I want to go to another front line in the critical mineral space, Indonesia. And we have here Pak Taryanto from Indonesia's Corruption Eradication Commission. Those of you in the anti-corruption space don't need an introduction to KPK, certainly. It's a famous institution. And it is yet again proven that it is at the forefront of fighting corruption by having actual cases related to critical minerals and actual convictions related to critical minerals. So I'm very keen to hear from you. I see the first slide is already there about a lovely place in North Maluku. Those of you who haven't been, I invite you strongly to go visit. It's lovely. Pak Taryanto, over to you.
Thank you, Pak Juhani, for the today's sharing session. In the relation with corruption cases in critical mineral supplies in Indonesia, KPK has 2 cases that directly link to the nickel corruption in the mining sector. And the first case you can see on the slide is the Kasuba case. It's still under investigation right now. On the other hand, the other case is the Nur Alam. Has already reached a verdict. Both of these cases initially began with a sting operation, a famous sting operation that KPK did, and eventually evolved into a significant corporate crime. So let me provide a summary on how these cases unfold. At first is Kasuba case. Kasuba case is the governor of the North Maluku. He is the central figure for this case. The sting operation was conducted simultaneously in Jakarta and Maluku on December 18, 2023, so not long ago, resulting in the arrest of 15 individuals, including the governor himself. During the operation, initially only money amounting of $44,000 that seized on the operation. But can you believe that the total amount of bribes received by the governor has surpassed more than $6 million to date, and still counting? And what he do to do the corruption? In 2020, Pak Johani, you remember there is a change in law number 4 2020 regarding mining for mineral and coal. It was implemented to centralize the issuance of mining permits, the IUP, and consequently, it's more than 400 IUP that evaluated by the governor. And from the 400 that IUPs, only 108 that have clean and clear status. So with the Kasuba and his associate took advantage of the 300 cancel IUPs. This process carried out by means of unlawful act. He proposed on the WIUP and then process the IUP. Before you get the IUP, you start with WIUP, the reserve for mining area, and then you get the mining permit.
Can you just explain what these permits are? I think it might be helpful for the group.
Okay. Before you do the mining in Indonesia, at first you must reserve the mining area first. It's called the WIUP. After you got the WIUP, then you proceed the proposal to Ministry of Energy and Resource Mineral to get the IUP. That's the process that they must do. But in this process, governor is carried out by means of unlawful acts. At first, in the making recommendation, the governor does not conduct any technical analysis for the proposed WIUP. So he didn't do any technical study. And then the second is the governor and his gang did not carry any analysis using an accredited laboratory. And the third is he did not evaluate the proposed WIUP. So with these three unlawful acts, it come into the high price since the area of mining is so huge. So that's why the bribe is so high. And to conceal their corrupt activities, it is something that very interesting in this case, that the governor appointed an individual named Ucu. He is held no official government position, but he wield a very significant amount of influence in the provincial governor of North Maluku. In 2021 until 2022, there are 100 WIUP proposal, and 78 of them were under Ucu's control. So he is very influenced, but he didn't have any position in the government. On the second case, we have Nur Alam, the governor of North Sulawesi. This is the Nur Alam. The governor of North Sulawesi, it's also originated from a sting operation, but it developed into a major investigation involving the governor. He charged with the corruption case of issuing the mining license for PT Anugrah Harisma Barakah, for which gratification of 2.5 million US from PT Rich Corp. PT Rich Corp is an affiliation company for PT Anugrah. And he's misusing his authority for the purpose of self-benefit by 166 million US. And for PT Bili Indonesia is another affiliated company, is 9 million US, and resulting in the state loss about 265 million US. The money is so huge, but the process is so simple. You know, the modus behind the case was the implementation of law number 4 year 2009, which mandated the auction process for the IUP issuance. So the illegal act that done by the governor is to backdate the proposal. So he only backdate the proposal. So as if that the proposal for IUP and WLP is published before the law number 4 year 2009 came into an effect. So this is a simple step, but causing such a huge loss for this country. That's it, Pak Johani, for the two cases that are directly linked to the nickel mineral. We also have another cases, but still in the pre-investigation, so I cannot tell you here. But maybe with some coffee we can talk.
Well,
thank you.
No, that's very intriguing. Well, thank you so much for the summary. Again, it's always amazing to me what Indonesia achieves in terms of enforcement records and the recoveries, right? quite impressive. Now I have to start my question to you with a small confession, which that I know the governor of North Maluku, and I have been to his governor's office about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I have to admit that I was a little surprised. I was telling you this about this before, when I went to his office and I went to wash my hands just before the meeting with him, and in the bathroom there was a whole stack of expensive designer shopping bags, and maybe I should have known something wasn't quite quite right there. What I wanted to actually just follow up on this for a moment, because we're about to engage in a conversation, is to dig a little bit into the unique success of KPK, because we work in many places and we don't see those kind of cases, right? We just don't see them. And of course, for those of you who don't know, but KPK has pretty unique authorities, right? You have your independent wiretapping authority. You have, of course, a very significant track record that, at least I surmise, means that people come to you with tips on who to wiretap and why and when, and that's probably eminently helpful when you're trying to find suspects. So obviously other law enforcement agencies sort of dream of the authorities that you have. But what I wanted to get to is how, in your assessment, are those two cases, if at all, different from other mining and licensing cases? So, because the reason, what I'm trying to get at is, do we need to modify our tools, including our law enforcement tools, in the situation related to the critical minerals space? Do you see any difference in comparison to other? I mean, there have been many mining cases in Indonesia. Please, keen for your thoughts here.
Okay. Based on these two cases, we see that we have a very weak point on the issuing the mining license. It's very weak, since the data that incorporated when people ask for mining license is, it's and many different institutions, ministries or agencies. So that's what happened. Like a simple example about the smelter. Smelter that come integrate with the mining, it's ruled by Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. But if you have smelter that stand alone, it will be ruled by Ministry of Commerce and Trade. So we have many data that separate, and the regulation is like condition to be someone can do unlawful acts in the environment. So that's why that based by these two cases, we try to integrate all the data between the ministry. So and it happened in our proposal with Simbara, Simbara, the information system for mineral and coal, inter-ministry and agencies. It coordinated and integrated data between 5 ministries and also Bank Indonesia. That's the point, that how we try to prevent it happen based from these two cases. And also we also have tool that from the prevention. So sometimes people, when talk with the prevention department, they will more open than they talk with KPK that came from the enforcement. So we have input from the prevention, and then we can dig for into the case, and also we can get many information from the field. I think that's we learned from these two cases.
Thank you for that. So this is the time for you, please, to engage. I'm glad that the ratio is skewing a little bit in your favor. That's very nice to see. So very keen for your thoughts and questions. Monica, you want to start? Kick us off? The Simbara, yeah. This is the information system. Yes, Monica, please.
Yes, sorry, you've been talking about mining, but the topic is actually about critical mineral supply chains. So what about recycling? Because I understand that can play quite a significant role in supply chains. Are there corruption risks there, and is that something that should be taken into account in the due diligence guidelines?
I suppose that's a question for you, probably. An easy one.
I'm not sure it's easy, but I'll do my best to try to answer. I think that when it comes to critical minerals, of course, we cannot avoid the issue of recycling. The urge is so high that actually recycling has been looked into as a way to alleviate some of the rush. Just on that, I wanted to dispel some of it. Unfortunately, according to the forecasting, for example, from the International Energy Agency, the contribution that recycling will actually make is going to be quite limited, even in the most rosy scenarios. And the reason is, unfortunately, because metal supply chains are made in a way that it is today easier to extract a ton of earth with some valuable ore in it and then purify it until commercial quality rather than take something that is already 100% refined from a computer or a phone and put it back in the supply chain. And this is just because our economic model has accustomed us to do so. We regularly hear about cities as the urban mines, but this is unfortunately not something that it is, at least with current technologies, but even with some controlling for some technological advances, is not something that is going to play a major role. Something that, again, on this issue that could play a major role is actually the reduction of the use of our minerals. We know how, for example, cars are getting bigger and bigger. Do we actually need those? How about thinking about different strategy when it comes to transportation and public transportation? But we're getting sort of astray from the question. And when it comes to recycling, I mean, I think that the risks are still mostly when it comes at declaration of commercial quality at export point and at import point. This is mostly due to avoid taxes, to pay the right dues, and we can also not speak about the e-waste, and here actually the Basel Institute is a better place to do so, because it does actually, we know that there's huge trafficking when it comes to e-waste. Anecdotally, these containers arriving in West African ports that are supposedly full of cars, but that when you open them, the cars are full of wires, and these end up in landfills and collection points, for example in Ghana or increasingly in Togo. All these are facilitated, this offloading of different types of waste and reclassification. We know that these are facilitated by corruption. But then again, I'm not an expert in this. I would love to see a dedicated due diligence guidance, but on waste supply chains, because the issue of recycling once again comes in at various points in this critical mineral narrative. But I defer to the experts here in the Basel Institute if they have any other contribution.
Well, thank you. By no means experts, but we do have a study that experts have written for us on this issue that we have written with experts. It's on our website. So please have a look. It's a fascinating space and one that is way underserved by all communities, including the anti-corruption community. So if anybody's looking for a niche PhD topic or a proposal for a flexible donor, it's definitely waste-related corruption. Did either of you want to come in on the recycling risk? Yeah. Okay.
Maybe just one small footnote. I was just going to say on the issue of waste, probably we may also want to look at international conventions to broaden the definition. I mean, the Basel Convention on the Transboundary Movement of Waste does not actually capture the whole issue of metals and critical minerals. And probably there may be protocols needed to try and just expand the definition of waste, both in the Basel Convention and in the Bamako Convention as well.
I just came into one thought about waste. Today in Indonesia, we try to convert waste into an energy. It's ruled by the presidential decree, so that we do the electrical from the waste. But the corruption in here that we look is regarding about the contract. Who will have the contract to convert the waste into energy? It's now today it's a kind of battle between contractor for the incinerator company and also the contractor for the RDF, reduce RDF fuel. So maybe if there is a corruption, it will be on the procurement side for who will do the waste thing, do the recycle thing. That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, that certainly aligns with our study. Other questions? Yes, please, sir. Can we pass the microphone along? Thank you. Although I'm not even sure if we need a microphone. Please go ahead.
To look at this ingenious question, is what you just described is something related to what we call corporate social responsibility or not? I have no idea about minerals, but since I have experience in working with environmental NGO, I just want to know this new concept. To Pak Tarianto, is there any case in Indonesia when we talk about corruption, not just about financial things? It's something related to environmental related. Is KPK is doing something small or big case related to environmental cases? So that's my two questions too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. About maybe it can relate with the Nur Alam cases, Pak. There is some unique in these Nur Alam cases that the environmental damage is state 2.7 trillion rupiah, so maybe it's about 300 million US, and it's based on the study that expert we hire, since the environmental damage for this illegal mining license that get by PT Rich Corp, it's so devastating for the North Maluku, for the Southeast Sulawesi. Maybe that's the case that related directly to the environmental, and uniquely, after some maybe 5 or 7 years after the case reached a verdict, the expert is got sued by PT Anugrah Harisma Baraka. So it's huge blow for the expert who calculate the damage for the environmental. So if we relate with the opening ceremony at the plenary, that there is an attack for the anti-corruption individual, that's also the attack that to the anti-corruption individual that come into the shoot, and I think the case is still not going through, but the person that got sued is got like a mental attack, so he think I think it will be difficult for him to come into the court again as an expert. That's what happened in the Nur Alam cases.
Just briefly on the CSR. So corporate social responsibility really comes from the understanding of that companies now operate in a context that goes beyond just their own operation, their business. And so some of the externalities that they might be linked to can be offset or covered by proactive action in communities. Now, we've seen that in past years, and this is a way also to secure a social license to operate, right? We've seen that in past years, these requirements have grown. So environmental, so calculating to what extent a company's operations, suppliers, and even supply chain are contributing in terms of CO2. There are reporting requirements. And we would like to see and push these corporate social responsibility to actually transform into something more and merge with other parts of the company. In other words, I don't think that it's useful to have philanthropic-like interventions, building a school, for example, in certain communities. Rather, for example, being open to implementing due diligence as the OECD defines it, which is, there again, understanding to what extent the company's operations or buying strategies are actually influencing some of the adverse impacts on the ground. If a company is refusing to engage with artisanal and small-scale manners, let's say, this might also mean, and is trying to, and decides to build a school in that community in order for children not to be there. It may look good on from a PR perspective, but it doesn't really address the root causes of, for example, child labor, which is poverty, and the disengagement from artisanal small-scale manners actually contributes to the problem rather than the solution. While it could, for example, if it took a more holistic idea of due diligence, engage with those artisanal miners, with the legitimate ones, contribute to formalize them, and then progressively bring them up to a point where their children do not need to actually work in the mine because they would be in school.
Thank you for highlighting that point, and thank you, Patrianto, also for highlighting the point that this is a high-risk activity, something certainly worth keeping in mind. Okay. Any more comments, questions? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Andita. I work in the KPK with Patrianto, and actually I want to ask Luca about something. This topic is actually very near and dear to my heart because for some reason this is like the red thread of my whole career. Before I joined the government, I worked in an electrical manufacturing company, and so at that time we managed the transformation of outfacing ROHS parts. If you are familiar with it, it's like there was a directive, an EU directive at that time, that's stating that some metals are being phased out for being toxic, like chromium and all that. So what we did at that time, we have different batches of metal parts. Some of them are containing toxic parts, and some of them are new, cleaner ones. And at that time, at my company, we actually divide on that these parts we can send on to Europe because it already adhere to the directive, but these parts we only sell to other markets where the directive is not in place yet. So in hindsight, I thought that it was like developed countries shifting environmental burden to the developing world because we were lagging on application of such standards, and that's also the driving force of corruption. Because in Indonesia there was a bribery, the Innospec case. It was a bribery in order to delay the outphasing of leaded fuel in Indonesia. So I think my question to Luca would be, does the responsible business conduct at the OECD look into these things as what responsible businesses should look into? Is that the developed world should not shift environmental waste burdens to other countries just because we're lagging, because that is also the driving force of corruption. I think that's my question.
Thank you so much for the question, Anita, and I'm glad to see that this waste question is coming back again and again. This is a pet, actually, it's a shadow topic of the session. I think we're all very passionate about it here. I mean, absolutely. The answer is yes, when it is done correctly. And actually, for a few examples, let's say some of the companies have. When it came to the Russian aggression of Ukraine, war of aggression of Ukraine, some of the companies were asking themselves, how do we actually disengage from certain context? And in the OECD guidance, we actually have this notion of responsible disengagement. So, for example, foreseeing some pay, for example, for up to 6 or 12 months for those workers that are going to be laid off. And when we So when we talk about shifting the responsibilities, we're extremely careful to avoid those kind of behavior. I mean, we've seen this even with more polluting assets, right? I mean, because of European regulation, coal plants are just sold to less regarding investors in some less regarding jurisdictions. This is not the way you become greener as a company. So this actually comes in the critical mineral space quite a bit. The value addition issue. I think DRC, Zambia are talking about it. How do we actually ensure that some of the value actually stays in the country? Indonesia has decided to do that. There are, I think, lessons learned, both in terms of, let's say, challenges and opportunities to do that for other countries. They decided to do so through an export ban before, but it also came with a tax holiday. So there again, and we've seen here. So what are the safeguards in some of the cases you quoted for corruption? In general, what we do so I will show it maybe in the next part, but the guidance has been integrated into legislation. And we always advocate when states decide to integrate it into legislation, it's the case of the EU, to actually foresee always supporting measures, so that these requirements are just not dumped onto other countries gratuitously, but there are actually supporting measures that can be, for example, certain types of development cooperation financing going there, facilitating for SMEs in those countries. These MOUs that you mentioned are not only, I think, let's say they do not get into a lot of detail when it comes to neither value addition, opportunities for safeguarding corruption. I think there is so much more that can be done as well in terms of supporting measures. What is the value proposition for some of these importing countries when it comes to MOU as a way to do that, but in general when promoting legislations?
Thank you. So we had this whole idea that we were going to talk about solutions in the second round, but we've already been talking quite a bit about potential solutions. So I don't want to sort of formalize the round, but I just want to ask the panelists if there were specific solutions that you wanted to raise that you didn't get the chance to raise yet before we go into another round of feedback questions.
Maybe before I dive into the solutions, I just want to throw another spanner into the works, and probably Luca would help us deal with that. I mean, a lot of these international companies that come to invest in critical minerals or in the mining sector in general come from jurisdictions where they have all these guidelines, where they say OECD guidelines, and some of them are even listed on the stock exchange. Others have committed themselves to global sustainability reporting. But when they come in an environment which potentially does not have a strong enforcement, they tend to throw everything out of the window. So the question that I often ask is, yes, we have all these guidelines, OECD or whatever else is coming from the international community. What's the level of compliance in countries outside where these guidelines are coming from?
I would like to say that the OECD has a SWAT team that could intervene in businesses that are not behaving responsibly, but unfortunately we do not. Of course, our standard is just as strong as the enforcement of member states. Now, I don't think we can just stop at that. And again, the guidance is for companies, but this cannot go without. Sorry, and I showed it in my very dramatic Italian gesture. It cannot go without the enforcement by governments in enabling this, setting this level playing field, and actually civil society organizations that in some of these countries where governments may be unable or unwilling to take measures are actually the ones that are the source of information that could be useful to other law enforcement communities. Now, the OECD guidance, and could we just show my presentation again? I just wanted to show the map because it was born as a soft law standard, but it has been integrated into obligatory law into some of the legislations. But more importantly, it also has become a requirement for doing business in metal exchanges, market associations, industry associations. So basically, you will have a different type of enforcement, which is private sector enforcement, that can be used. So there again, it's very small, but there actually on the bottom left, there is a list of industry initiative and market associations that have integrated the guidance for their members. So if as a for example, gold producer, but in the case of critical minerals, if you're a brand willing to sell on the London Metal Exchange, you will need to pass an annual audit according to the OECD guidance, because otherwise you will not be able to sell it anymore and you will be kicked out of the exchange. Now, the idea sounds very good. Audits are far from perfect, especially on corruption, and this is a finding we want to even push more, because companies, unfortunately, will still be looking for that kind of 2-3 day audit, looking at more or less country of origin, but we know that, well, forensic audits need a different type of skills, a different type of time, and a different type of costs as well. But this is an infrastructure that anyone can actually use to push those companies. And it's far from perfect, I think I'm the first to recognize that, but it is already something that can be used. And in a way, it is only helpful when countries such as, well, the DRC that have integrated into the legal framework, and then through the Lusaka Declaration, all the head of states of the Conference on the International Great Lakes region have endorsed the guidance as a way to fight against the trafficking of national resources. More countries that do so, more countries that actually align their legal frameworks can actually have yet another way, yet another tool to enforce it. Soft law standard, it was born as a soft law standard, but we are inching towards hard consequences. That's what we say.
If I may, maybe just a few points that I was going to make, and in a way, Luca and my colleague have kind of alluded to this. Yes, we need institutional and legal reforms, but in my view, we need the right institutional fit to deal with the rush for critical minerals. And the reason why I say that is that at times we place an emphasis, for instance, on dealing with the mining cadastre or any of these licensing outfits. But you forget to look at the tax authorities, for instance. And Zambia is a good case. One of the recent cases that has been actively been investigated was a question of lithium being transported, exported out of the country as sand, building sand, declared as building sand. It had to take the Zambia Revenue Authority to note that it was not building sand. But Zambia Revenue Authority is not well placed. We're even lucky that they noted that the lithium about to be exported was not building sand. But there's no deliberate effort beyond just dealing with the mining ministry and the law enforcement agencies to also look at tax authorities and other related authorities to play a critical role in dealing with these matters. I would therefore think that we need to do, and in the case of Zambia, corruption risk mapping to really identify what the corruption hotspots would be across the entire value chain of critical minerals, but also identifying the institutional capacity to address some of these corruption risks. But also talking about the model of fighting corruption. I argue that as long as we continue focusing on the enforcement model with limited capacity, maybe our colleagues in Indonesia have better capacity than the Anti-Corruption Commission in Zambia, which probably does not even have any expertise to deal with very technical issues of this nature. So you have the enforcement model of fighting corruption, and your hope, because it's command and control, your hope is that you have the law enforcement agencies capable of enforcing the laws. And in most cases, the capacity is weak. And those that engage themselves in unscrupulous activities know the weakness of the law enforcement agencies. But if it's not the law enforcement agencies, it's a judicial system. So cases are taken to court on technicalities. We've seen people walk simply because the judiciary itself has not done very well, even just on the broader aspect of dealing with environmental crimes. Now you're bringing in a specialized case to do with critical minerals. So there's much more that we need to do beyond just improving the law for one sector, but looking at it more holistically. I think I've touched on the judiciary. I'll just end by just indicating that I think that even issues of land access, corruption to do with land, maybe in some countries the situation is different. In the part of the world where I come from, most of the minerals are on traditional land. So he as a traditional leader, leading a group of poor, hungry villagers, receives $250,000 as gratification, receives it, gives us huge tracts of land. So there's corruption. There's already a lot of challenges to do with corruption in the land sector. But we need to make that link of how do we deal with corruption in the land sector as it relates to issues of critical minerals. I think those are some of the issues I wanted to raise. And one last point. In Zambia, artisanal small-scale miners largely don't want to be formalized for fear of taxation purposes. So there's been a pushback from their end. They see the benefits, but they know the implication of formalization in that they really will be caught up in the tax bracket. And it will be good to learn from others how they're dealing with that. That becomes critical for a place like Zambia because if you look at the licensing regulations, most of the critical minerals are supposed to be handled by artisanal small-scale miners because of the nature of the mining licenses. However, we're now seeing the big boys entering this space, and the artisanal small-scale miners are selling off their mining licenses. And they are doing that without even following due procedure of how they should transfer these mining licenses. So it will be interesting to know what is happening elsewhere.
Thank you, Ruben, for making these points. And I can certainly confirm that the tax authorities, I think, are really secret allies that we haven't worked with enough. We have really good experience engaging with tax authorities in Uganda, actually, in relation to wildlife crime, where we were really struggling for a long time until struggling for a long time to engage, especially the financial elements of crime. And for tax authorities, that's a natural thing. That's what they do, right? And so especially in difficult financial times when there's strong political push for them to generate revenue, it is surprisingly easy. It's like walking through an open door, when you point at certain targets that tax violation charges can be leveraged against. I wanted to maybe, if I may, shift to Patarianto for a minute, because you were talking about prevention. We've had lots of conversations about enforcement, of course, and this is a favorite topic of ours. But I appreciate the importance of prevention, certainly. And Luca has talked at quite some detail about the private sector corruption prevention. And I'll say I'm always amazed when I go to the OECD and I see all these companies sending people there to learn about these standards and speaking about these standards very knowledgeably. That's an investment that these companies make, right? So it may be soft law, but I think that really understates the importance of it. But let's turn from the private sector also to the government sector. Back to our friend Nur Alam in South Sulawesi and my friend the governor in North Maluku. What can we do inside government to prevent these situations from occurring? What are the steps that could work, do you think?
Okay, maybe my slide, Mr. Lucas. We have at least 3 strategies, Pak Juhani, to prevent it happen again. At first, of course, is we have a regulation strategy. We must provide a healthy regulation. Like I said before, that it's unhealthy, the same smelter, but it regulated by the different ministries. But if the process in the refining the law is too complicated, then we try using simpler method, like we use the presidential decree. In nickel mineral, it's going through many doors, with many ministries and agencies, system operating independently through the entire supply chain. It encompasses various tasks like issuing proof of royalty payment, export approval, surveyor report, sailing approval, and also the tax. And additionally, manual service and document checking process is still in place. So they do it manually at that time. So the situation is affecting the traceability of data and documents, and it leading into the inconsistency and the possibility of the state losses. So we encourage that all the ministries and institutions involved to integrate all their data into one system. Maybe on my slide, Mr. Lucas, my slide. What is the system that we propose? Is we told it before, is coming to the strategy number 2 is. This is the regulation strategy that we try to regulate our ministries and institutions involved to integrate their data into one system. This is the system that we propose. We call it Simbara. It integrate from Ministry of Finance, and including there is a tax Directorate General, and also the Ministry of Energy and Resource and Mineral, Ministry of Industry and Commerce, Ministry of Transportation, and Bank Indonesia. It merged 9 systems to facilitate the reconciliation and validation the data between ministries. And for the result in 2021 till 2022 alone has increased the non-tax-based income for Indonesia more than 100% in this area. And stop the state revenue leakage worth more than 339 million US by utilizing this application. This is we do it by doing digital, and by doing digital, we can also utilize the tool to engage the public involvement. But without public involvement, it's very difficult for us to monitoring corrupt activities in the field. KPK only have 1,600 person, so it will be impossible for us to monitor maybe more than 1,000 port in Indonesia. So it is essential to encourage public participation, and it can be facilitated through the Jaga platform. It's a digital platform so that people can report and can complain about the corrupt practice that happen in the field. And this is the last strategy that now we try, but still in treat the human well. We want to have a good remuneration for law enforcer and civic servant. Like we talk this known with Pak Peter, the corruption in law enforcer, we will lose trust, and lose trust is more than we lose wealth. So this is that we try in this transition between the Pak Jokowi to Pak Prabowo, we try to incorporate a comprehensive initiative within this President Strategic Roadmap for 2024-2029. We want to enhance compensation for both law enforcement and civic servant. And today we already coordinated with many embassies from our friendly countries. So we want to have a study. We want to compare remuneration for our law enforcement and civic servant with Singapore, with Malaysia, with Thailand, Korea, India, Australia. So we want, it will be nearly impossible for person who operate in the field with many money involved that they don't have a good remuneration for them. It will be difficult for them. And last but not least, the corruption that we face we cannot face it alone. So we must encourage public enforcement, public participation, and another agencies. So we have some like jargon we call that. Let's do teamwork like the Avenger and be brave like the Lone Ranger. So that's why we have the pin that, berani, jujur, hebat, as you dare to be honest, as amazing. That's the pin, and the red pin that on your chair. That's it, Pak Johan.
Thank you for that especially for that inspiring last note. So we're coming to the end of our time, but Johannes, you had your hand up, so I want to make sure that I get 100% audience participation today.
Yeah, thank you for this discussion, Johannes Ton with the Center for International Private Enterprise. I used to lead Global Integrity's anti-corruption work, so I appreciate the way that you have framed the panel by looking into the substance that we're discussing, looking into some of the problems, discussing some of the solutions, and also looking at both government, international organizations, standards enforcement, and civil society thinking. I think that's a great way of looking at these issues and setting out the panel. My interest now would be to dig a little bit deeper into this notion of how do we become the Avengers? Or how do we actually link and integrate across different issue areas if we all agree and acknowledge that these are systemic problems in the end, where there's not one magic bullet, right, that will just turn the system around. If we all agree that there are so many different levers that we need to pull on, push on, understand better, work on better. And I think essentially we do, although we oftentimes don't start with that proposition because it just sounds too complicated, and we try to keep it simple in one vertical, which is understandable. How do we go about that? And I'm asking this because this mode of discussing the problems that we have and the solutions that we have has led us to have these conferences here and elsewhere where we essentially come together in this sort of format and share some initial instances of problems, initial instances of solutions, but then oftentimes we part ways, and each organization on their own continues to try to navigate the space. So I could leave it here. I could give one example, if that was helpful. One example is a much cleaner or much narrower vertical, the BOT space, the beneficial ownership transparency space, in which we have much clearer ideas about what the problems are, what the solutions are in comparison to the topic you were discussing in breadth or in depth. But even there, the coordination between organizations from funder side, from government side, from civil society in country is at the best in its beginning. It's not very coordinated and hasn't been for a good long time. So I wonder if you all have ideas about how to spur our capability jointly to just talk with each other about strategic entry points, get closer to pieces where we can support each other and complement the system to move forward together.
Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful final question for us to ponder about. I'll give everyone the moment to think for a minute while I abuse my authority, and actually suggest that we have struggled with exactly this issue as well since we created the Green Corruption Program at the Basel Institute, and realized, of course, that the program is tremendously huge and ridiculously diverse. We can't possibly have experts in every space, but we need to have experts in every space in order for us to have any reasonably professional input on how to mitigate corruption risks, especially in the prevention side, but also on the enforcement side. And so very quickly our realization was that the absolute only way is to work in collaboration, and we've invested quite heavily in the Environmental Corruption Practitioners Forum. Monica is holding up a card. I don't know if you were setting us up for this, but if you weren't, thank you, or if you were anyway, thank you. And so we have 700 members there, and I will be the first to say that it is not a perfect solution to the issue you addressed, but it is a work in progress, and it is progressing quite remarkably from my perspective. And I'll give you one example. At a call that I was at, one of the working groups of the Practitioners Forum focuses on following the money. And so we have about 50 law enforcers who join from 8 or 9 countries, depending on the call, who all try to apply follow the money, money laundering, tax evasion, so criminal law offenses related to financial manipulation, to the environmental space, and all of them struggle with this. Every call we have, they say, "Oh, this is so difficult. It's so hard." But what we're seeing is that this sort of loneliness that each of these individual experiences in their agency can actually be bridged by talking to countries they would never talk to before, right? So we have, the last call we had folks from Ukraine asking folks from Bolivia about a specific, technical approach they had and how they can apply money laundering charges to something or something like this. And so it sounds a little mushy, and this is not usually my style, but it is remarkable how those very technocratic, very specific connections of people that are not senior, that don't come to conferences like this, right, are able to start talking to each other, and it takes a lot of doing. But when they start, it's a beautiful thing to watch. So I encourage you all to think of similar ways to build and stick with it, because it's a 2-year effort until you get them to start talking to each other. That's a long time, right? So just a small advertisement break before I hand it over to our panelists for their inputs. I hope you had some time to think about the question. You're welcome.
Well, Jonas is putting us on the spot. I do agree that we could use the leverage of BOT to try and start addressing what definitely are very complex issues. But I also tend to suggest that the applicability of BOT across sectors needs to be well marketed. The fact that in Zambia, as you rightly know, BOT is being handled by the company registration entity has kind of isolated very critical government institutions from this whole discussion. So right from the onset, we need to demonstrate that when we talk about BOT, it is not just confined to the companies and the commercial entities, but it can be applied right across other ministries. But let's also face it. We already have a challenge of government departments and ministries operating in silos, not just on BOT, but on many other issues. So we still have a big challenge to try and get government entities to operate across their ministerial mandates and portfolios. But we have to build those cross-partnerships. But I also worry about the capacity of civil society to engage in this whole debate. I have a colleague who you know very well, Ian Winga from EITI Zambia. And Ian always says Zambian civil society are not paying attention to the extractive industry. We are more attracted with the political debates that are happening around the country. So the problem could also be with CSOs not building sufficient capacity to see that this is an important area of engagement, one which could even be linked to their whole activity of promoting good governance, etc. But there are also other critical reforms that tends to take away from the opportunities that BOT would present if I look at the Zambian case. The multiplicity of licensing regimes, the business licensing, we've been trying to streamline the business licensing in Zambia because that in itself presents a lot of corruption risks. There are areas we've never tackled, like the revolving door aspect. It's only in Zambia, look, where you have a permanent secretary of the Ministry of Mines, tomorrow being the country manager of FQM. How does that work? This guy had access to government information and is now working as country manager for one of the big mining houses. So we still have to deal with issues of revolving doors, conflict of interest. So even within government, if we're going to prevent corruption, we need to strengthen the conflict of interest laws, the revolving door issues or insider dealing issues, because otherwise we are defeating ourselves. But I wanted to end by just indicating that, as some of you know, Zambia is now going to do a geophysical mapping. And I've been telling colleagues that that will be the biggest source of corruption in the country because of insider dealing. The same government officials will now know that on Ruben's small farm, that is where critical minerals are. Then I'll get someone making an offer that is so insane that even my wife says, well, you'll be mad to refuse this. So how do we deal with the potential for government technocrats having access to this information which they then sell or trade in influence because it's to their own benefit? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now intrigued about your farm. Very small, but apparently has potential. Let's turn to you, and I also want to bring in the BOT question actually on Indonesia, because of course your emerging beneficial ownership transparency system is intriguing, and I saw wasn't included in the data sharing system. So maybe you can comment a little bit about that. I'm also quite curious.
Yes. About the BOT, for Indonesia, still struggling about it, since the data regarding the BOT, there are no strict rule for a company to disclose all their information regarding their BOT. So it's still struggling actually for the Indonesia, and just like but Johannes talk about under coordination, or we work together. Actually, behind this system, there is a story behind this system why we can coordinating many ministries. After our friend from enforcement came to them, they have cases. Then we can go to them, and they will coordinate with us, with open arm. Before the enforcement, before we got cases on them, they will just try to close their door. But after our enforcer come and open the case on them, and then they can, okay, please do some correction for us. So I think the coordination between agencies in Indonesia, and also about the BOT, maybe we can start by we open the case about that, and after it bring to the public and come into the court, and after that, then we can try to enforce them, to encourage them to open the data, since we cannot rely on agency or a company to open their data, willingly. We must force them, and we must have a rule to force them to open it. And a good tool that we have is we try to we send the enforcer to them, like for the Ministry for ASDM, Ministry of Commerce, all have the cases, corruption cases are there. So after the case is open, and then the prevention person can come and try to refine that process. I think that's about Johanny.
Thank you for that very pragmatic approach, which I can confirm works very well, actually. Nothing like coming to offer prevention after the minister has been arrested. Okay, Luca, you're now in the unenviable position that we are literally the last panel. I hear the guys next doors have already clapped and are out the door. I'm getting signals we have to leave. So you're by far the most committed panel, the most committed audience. I thank you, each one of you personally. And Luca, you have the last word.
Well, I'm already late at this very late panel, but I just wanted to say that we feel the same issue with coordination. It's in the space. It can be a small space, can be a huge space. It's still, we're still going to have a lack of coordination. And I just want to echo what Johanny said. Bringing together certain types of stakeholders is definitely one way to do it. Another way to do it, and it is not applicable to all spaces, but would be to integrate multi-stakeholder governance in some of these mechanisms. It's not revolutionary, but we actually feel that maybe the added value of things such as the guidance, which was, for example, negotiated with the multi-stakeholder group, is that it becomes a common language across 3 constituencies that would never talk to each other or not in the same terms. And already passing, this first challenge of not being able to understand each other is a good premise for dialogue.
Thank you. That's a very nice summary. And again, I thank you all for participating, sticking with it. It was a fascinating discussion, and I thank you for the 4 days. Ruben, you in particular, and everyone else. Looking forward to more discussions on this issue as it emerges. Thanks.